I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to number 39 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the committee's motion adopted on Friday, February 5th, 2021, the committee is meeting to study all aspects of COVID-19 spending, programs, and related monetary policy. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast will only show those that are speaking. So with that, we will go to witnesses. I should just mention, I'm not sure, Mr. Tremblay and Dr. Kershaw, whether you've 5-minute remarks again or not. You were here recently. You don't need to go through long remarks if you don't want to. We can go to questions.
Prepared 5 minutes for what it's worth.
Okay, all right.
All right,
we will start. We'll start with the, and I do understand there may be a little difficulty that some of the witnesses didn't get their headsets, and maybe a little difficulty with translation, and we may have some difficulties there. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Tremblay, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I welcome the opportunity to continue our discussion of the Solutions Lab program, which is a key element of Canada's 10-year, 70 billion plus national housing strategy. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you again today from Ottawa under traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. J'ai expliqué le fonctionnement des laboratoires de solutions.
I explained how Solutions Lab worked during my previous appearance, so I won't go over ground we've already covered. But I do want to reiterate our commitment and confidence in this innovative approach to solving complex housing issues. As I said last time, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation had funded 47 Solutions Labs as of December 31st, 2020. I provided brief details on a couple of them. The examples I offered showed how diverse stakeholders are focusing in on vulnerable groups who often fall through the cracks of Canada's housing system. These groups need special, targeted solutions to meet their unique needs. And this is what Solutions Lab are all about.
I could share with you, but instead I want to take this opportunity to emphasize something we are not doing, and that is funding research on a home equity tax. This was a significant topic of discussion at our last meeting. Regrettably, erroneous media reports, misinterpretation of the research parameters of one lab in particular have led to this misunderstanding. I would like to put any concerns about this to rest today. As is the case for most national housing strategy initiatives, the ultimate goal of the Solutions Lab program is to increase housing supply. There is a direct relationship between housing supply and affordability. Whether we are talking home ownership or rental housing, cost increases when there is not enough supply to meet demand. The impacts trickle down through the entire housing continuum. Increasing supplies of all types of housing is therefore the primary solution to the housing crisis many communities and households face today. It's no secret that house prices have been increasing at record levels in many of Canada's largest cities. Bidding wars are common, and many buyers are paying tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price to acquire a home. That means Canadians are taking on more and more debt. The combination of high house prices, low interest rates, high levels of households indebtedness, and the economic uncertainty caused by the COVID pandemic represents a real threat to the financial well-being of young Canadian families and to Canada's overall economic stability. This is why OSFI has proposed to strengthen the stress test for uninsured mortgages, a proposal that is fully supported by CMHC. Making housing more affordable is why we exist. As I mentioned last time, we have set a bold aspirations that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. There's no doubt that some of the ideas we have been hearing about from Solutions Lab will help us towards achieving this goal. Je tiens à remercier encore une fois le comité de m'avoir.
I want to thank the committee again for inviting me back, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have at this time.
Thank you again, Mr. Tremblay. And then turning to Generation Squeeze, Dr. Kershaw, you've been through this process before, not long ago. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, I'm a policy professor at the UBC School of Population Health and founder of Gen Squeeze. And Gen Squeeze is a force for intergenerational fairness to improve Canadian well-being, powered by the voices of Canadians in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, the kids we represent and the family members who love us, all backed by cutting-edge research. And when you requested my participation a couple of weeks ago, I focused in particular on the need for policymakers to reduce an intergenerational tension in our housing system. Our current policies incentivize many everyday households to want two incompatible things from housing. On the one hand, we often want housing to provide an affordable place to call home. On the other hand, we want housing to provide a good return on investment. And the problem is those two things are incompatible, because when something is a good return on investment, by definition, its value is growing faster than local incomes. But when something grows faster than local incomes, it becomes less affordable. And for the last several decades, a cohort of Canadians who tend to be older and reside more in urban areas has reaped substantial gains in wealth as a result of rising home prices, all while sleeping and watching TV and cooking and raising kids and making our homes. And I shared with you my own story about how my own wealth windfalls are implicated in that. But unfortunately, one of the outcomes from housing wealth windfalls for people like me and others is that those who follow in our footsteps, our kids and grandchildren, they have a much more challenging time to find a place to call home that is affordable, even in places where they grew up. And I pointed out last time that our national housing strategy so far fails to address this intergenerational tension because it never once mentions the word wealth. And that omission reflects a hesitancy on the part of our world of politics to address intergenerational tensions. By being silent, our world of politics is collectively standing by as many Canadians are over-consuming wealth windfalls that erode the sustainability of the housing system to deliver affordability for generations to come. It's quite similar, actually, to our climate change problem. While the last couple of years clearly signal some important federal progress, Canadian policy remains quite slow to address the reality that Canadians today are over-consuming the atmosphere's scarce capacity to absorb carbon. And we don't yet price pollution at a high enough value for the harm that it's causing. And so what do? We leave younger Canadians and future generations to pick up the tab for our present overconsumption of this scarce capacity. And that overconsumption undermines the sustainability of the very climate on which younger Canadians are depending for our health and economic well-being. And we know that's a big price to impose. And it's not just environmental debt, there's also government debt, which we know is ballooning as a result of the emergency response to COVID, and that is appropriate in this emergency moment. But the sustainability of government finances was already being disturbed prior to the pandemic, in no small part because the federal government was not prioritizing balancing budgets even when we were not in a recession. And I think one of the concerns that I want to draw attention to today with the moments that I have remaining in my opening remarks is that the world of politics has shied away from helping Canadians to recognize another intergenerational tension, in this case in regards to our old age security system, which is a very important system to protect, but it's at the heart of an intergenerational tension in our budgets. And our budgeting messaging coming out of Ottawa each year is risking burying those details in its fine print, which is not a partisan problem, it's a long-term problem. And I think the most recent budget's really instructive. Everyone in this room could be forgiven for thinking that childcare was the biggest social spending increase in federal budget 2021. And you should know that Gen Squeeze is proud of what happened in that budget. We've worked hard to popularize the concept of $10 a day childcare, where we first gave this label to a pan-Canadian childcare recommendation in our lab over a decade ago. And along with tremendous mobilization by the Coalition of Childcare Advocates and early educators in BC, a 10aday.ca movement was born, and it's clearly had important influence on national thinking. And I want to congratulate the federal government for really investing now in a meaningful way into childcare. But it should be known that childcare is nowhere near the largest social spending investment in the 2021 budget. Increases to OAS absorb far more taxpayer dollars. And I beg of everyone in this room to go pay a lot of attention to Table A1, Period 6 of the budget, which shows that the Government of Canada plans to increase spending on OAS by $22 billion a year as of 2025, compared to a year ago. That $22 billion increase is 3 times more than the roughly $8 billion that Ottawa plans to add to childcare in 2025. It's more than the nearly $18 billion that Budget 2021 plans to spend over several years for its green recovery to create jobs, build a clean economy, and protect us against climate change. And it's about 10 times greater than the $2.5 billion that Budget 2021 adds for affordable housing over the next several years. So when Canadians and our politicians reflect on why our national government still plans a $31 billion deficit in 2025, well after we hope the pandemic-induced recession is over, it's going to be important to acknowledge that growth in OAS spending is a primary factor. And to be clear, OAS spending itself is not a problem on its own. Old age security is important because it helps seniors enjoy financially secure and healthy retirements. Almost every younger Canadian will love a parent or a grandparent who uses OAS. My mom and dad do, so do my in-laws. But it is a problem that governments resist being honest with Canadians about the need to consider new ways to raise revenue to cover its growing costs. And this means that today's retirees can rightly claim that they pay taxes towards OAS throughout their working lives. But the problem is our governments weren't sufficiently honest with them about how much they needed to contribute in the past in order to ensure their generation didn't take from the current system more than they put in. And that outcome is unpaid bills that they leave for their kids and grandchildren. So let me close. Intergenerational tensions. They are at the heart of a lack of political commitment to sustainability in our housing system, sustainability in our climate system, and sustainability in our government budget system. And now is the time for us to come together to build for our world of politics the political cover to be courageous, to act on the evidence, to reduce these tensions so that Canada truly works for all generations. Thank you.
Merci, Dr. Kershaw. Turning then to the shift with Ms. Farah. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leilani Farha. I'm the Global Director of The Shift, an international human rights organization focused on housing. I'm also the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing, a post I held for 6 years until April 2020. And I was the Executive Director of Canada Without Poverty. It will come as no surprise to you that Canada is in a long-standing housing crisis, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic. 1.7 million households are in core housing need. I'm sure you've heard these stats before. 235,000 people are living in homelessness. New homeless encampments are springing up in every city, big and small. More than 250,000 rental households are in arrears and are now at risk of eviction from their homes. And according to the OECD, Canada has seen a 168% increase in real house prices over the last 20 years. That puts us as the leader in the OECD, with the UK next, 70 percentage points below us. In keeping with the federal government's commitment to the National Housing Strategy Act and to progressively realize the right to housing, Budget 2021 includes a number of measures to address aspects of this housing crisis. But a fundamental blind spot in the budget, in my opinion, is its failure to address the monetary and fiscal policies that are heavily implicated in the housing crisis. With a few exceptions, it seems that structural changes to fiscal policy beyond spending is somewhat off limits for use in addressing the housing crisis. And this blind spot suggests to me that the budget, despite its huge expenditures, might not be as effective as the government would hope. Let me use affordability as the example, given that affordability is the cornerstone of the right to housing, or a cornerstone, and a key driver of homelessness and housing precarity. The budget commits to a number of measures to address affordability: more money for the Rapid Housing Initiative, rent supplements for women and children leaving violent relationships, resources for community-based housing. While these measures may produce some new affordable housing, Canada's monetary and fiscal policies actually incentivize housing unaffordability. The Bank of Canada, as you know, has lowered interest rates and engaged in quantitative easing, which makes money cheap. It allows institutional investors easy access to the loans they need to purchase existing properties, and institutional landlords have a vested interest in raising rents. It's not surprising then that in the last 5 years, and particularly in recent months, real estate investment trusts have been buying up affordable rental housing stock. For example, in January, I think it was, Ontario-based InterRent and Crestpoint REITs purchased 15 rental apartments, or over 600 units in Vancouver. Starlight and Timber Creek bought 7 buildings in Toronto in August 2020, and CapREIT purchased 88 units in Halifax in the same month. Increasing the turnover of tenants and raising rents is part of their business model. It's necessary to securitize loans and to project a solid return for prospective investors. A study out of Toronto from 2012 till 2019 found that financialized and corporate landlords filed 64% of all above guideline rent increase requests, potentially impacting over 175,000 households. The rise in REITs in Canada is in part due to fiscal policies that grant them preferential tax treatment. The only trusts, as I understand it, that do not pay corporate income tax. Acorn Canada reports that if just seven of Canada's residential REITs had been taxed at the same rate as non-REIT corporations, the government would have had an extra $1.2 billion in a 10-year period. I should add that REITs and other corporate landlords also benefit from CMHC lending and mortgage insurance, and Michelle and I have talked about this on other occasions. In conclusion, if the government had really examined the drivers of unaffordability and looked at its own fiscal policy, it would have been impossible to completely leave out measures to protect tenants in arrears in Budget 2021. But really, for me, it's the result of this omission that doesn't make sense. 250,000 rental households are facing eviction. And as some of the most vulnerable low-income households, they are at real risk of homelessness. To me, that creates a zero-sum game for the government, addressing homelessness with one hand and then creating it potentially with the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Leilani. Before I turn to the last witness, the question lineup to start with 6-minute rounds is Mr. Fast, Mr. McLeod, Mr. St. Marie, and Ms. Kwan. So we'll turn to the last witness, who is the last witnesses, who is the self-governing Indigenous governments, Mr. Mahaffey, who's legal counsel and senior advisor for the Carcross Tagish First Nations, and Miss Zoe. I'm not sure who's leading off. Miss Zoe, you leaning ahead there? Okay, floor is yours. Go ahead. Welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
We got you.
Okay, great. So thank you Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak today on this important issue. My name is Bertha Rabeska Zoe, and I've been asked to speak on behalf of the Clincho and other self-governing Indigenous governments about the significant challenges our communities face when it comes to housing. Close to half of Clincho citizens do not have their core housing needs met. For those that of you might not be familiar with Northwest Territories, Clincho is, we live just north of Yellowknife in 4 communities, and there's over 20 communities in the Northwest Territories. So more than 128 Clincho families are currently on a wait list for housing. These families are waiting 8 or 9 years to get a roof over their heads. Over a quarter of the homeless population in Yellowknife are from the Clincho community of Bichico, which I'm in Bichico right now, and we're about an hour drive from Yellowknife. Many of these people are young children, women, and families. We simply do not have the houses needed to give them a place to live. Clincho citizens also face disproportionately high rates of overcrowding. 20% of Clincho families live in overcrowded conditions. There are very serious health implications to these housing gaps. Even before COVID-19, researchers were sounding the alarm on the impacts of overcrowding in Clincho homes. While tuberculosis is all but eradicated in most of Canada, as of 2018, the Clincho community of Bichico had more cases of tuberculosis than all of the communities of the entire NWT combined. This should come as no surprise. Bichico has been widely referred to as ground zero for Clincho housing crisis. The housing conditions in this community is objectively the worst in the entire territories. Measures such as social distancing and social isolation are impossible to implement in Bichico and for our citizens experiencing homelessness. And this is similar. This is seen for most First Nation in the Northwest Territories as well as across Canada. Just this past weekend, schools in Yellowknife and the surrounding areas closed in response to a rising number of COVID cases caused by the UK variant of concern. Yesterday, the schools in Bichico followed suit. The Clincho citizens who live in sheltered system in Yellowknife and the many of Bichico residents who travel to Yellowknife daily for groceries, work, and other essential needs are all in danger. If just one citizen catches this virus, it will spread through our homes like wildfire. When we say that our communities need housing, this is what we are talking about. When we say we are vulnerable to COVID-19, this is how dire it is. Understand that committee is considering how the federal government is spending COVID-19 money on housing programs. My message to you is that there is more that needs to be done to help self-governments like the Clincho to address the fundamental housing shortages our people face. The Rapid Housing Initiative was a step in the right direction, but it did not go far enough to target the disparities in Indigenous communities. Over half the available funding under the initiative went to municipalities. The second stream was open to Indigenous governments, but we are competing with provinces, territories, municipalities, and nonprofit organizations for a limited pool of resources. The evidence is clear that housing crisis in Indigenous communities far outstrips the need elsewhere. We are therefore recommending that the committee consider these disparities and prioritize more funding to where the need is highest. We also think that future initiatives need to be more responsive to the realities of remote communities. The Rapid Housing Initiative prioritized housing projects that could be up and running in 12 months or less. Getting construction jobs organized in remote places takes time. You might have to wait for a winter road or supply arrangement that takes longer than you would see in more southerly areas. The Clincho and other self-governments should not be disadvantaged because of the complexities of building infrastructures in remote locations. If future program spending does not incorporate more flexibility, we will continue to be disadvantaged in the ways we have been for far too long already. Lastly, funding for housing should flow directly to self-governments. Our treaties establish our governments as partners in Canada's system of fiscal federalism. Providing direct allocation is in line with government-to-government relationship we share with Canada. As you consider federal spending on COVID-19 programs and initiatives, I hope you will keep in mind both the evidence of need in Indigenous communities, as well as the impact that an investment in Indigenous housing would not have just in reducing the spread of COVID-19, but in improving outcomes for generations of Indigenous citizens across the country. I'm hopeful that the challenges posed by COVID-19 will give us an opportunity to right some of the historic wrongs that continue to impact our people and build a brighter future for our citizens. Masi for allowing us to present to you today. And I have with me my colleague, Matt Mahaffey, who's, as he was introduced earlier, will be available to answer technical questions if you have them. Masicho.
Thank you very much for your presentation there, Ms. Zoe. And thank you all for your presentations. We'll turn then to questions. The first round will be 6 minutes each, and we'll start with Mr. Fast. Ed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question just briefly to Mr. Tremblay. Mr. Tremblay, you're familiar with the project charter that established this Solutions Lab study on intergenerational wealth inequity, correct?
I am, yes, sir.
Who actually drafted the project charter itself? Was it CMHC? Was it Generation Squeeze? Who did that?
I believe we did that in collaboration, but Dr. Kershaw, I wasn't intimately involved as Dr. Kershaw was, but I think it was a joint effort.
Okay. And when that study report is finished, what would it be used for? What's the purpose?
The purpose of the report?
Yes.
The report, I guess, as Dr. Kershaw mentioned in his opening remarks both today and yesterday, is to look at wealth inequality and its impact on affordability. It will then be published, and then people can look at it, determine what they want to do, and what next steps could be.
Now, would this be something that government would look at and use it to be informed on future housing policy?
Well, the information would be available on our website, so it would be publicly available to whoever would want to look at it. It would be just one data point among all sorts of other data points in terms of making policies.
Okay, and now I refer you to the executive summary. The executive summary, of course, is supposed to summarize what the study is about, and it refers to being about one key source of this intergenerational inequality being tax policy that privileges home ownership and shelters housing wealth. Because it refers to one key source, but doesn't go beyond that, what are the other key sources of intergenerational inequality that might have been studied?
I think that's probably best for Dr. Kershaw to elaborate on that.
Well, I'd be glad to ask him that question, but I thought maybe CMHC would be familiar with the certainly the executive summary itself, and why the executive summary only refers to one key source of that intergenerational inequality, and that is tax policy that privileges home ownership.
So I think it's a known fact that there's been studies on home ownership being preferred over rental housing to the tune of 8 to 1 and to as much as 15 to 1 in terms of Canada, and that includes provincial government, municipal governments, and so forth. So I don't think we can dispute that it is one of the key sources.
All right. I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Kershaw, given the fact that clearly one of the areas to be examined was going to be tax policy as it relates to housing wealth. Has your organization, Generation Squeeze, actually taken a position on a home equity tax?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So I also take a step back, and you were asking Mr. Tremblay about other policy areas that we were considering. So just to have that on the record, we were looking at public finance generally, and it actually does coordinate quite well with as far as observations about monetary policy and sort of tax policy writ large. She gave you an example of how, you know, the non-taxation of capital gains at REITs levels is a, you know, a big subsidy there, a big incentive for REITs and other big companies to think about making investments through the housing system, and is incentivized to do so in Canada. Monetary policy right now is making it so inexpensive for people to borrow. It's a great way for people to think about getting into the market, and then once they are, hoping that they'll get a good return on investment as well. So we are looking at those broad range of things. And it is the case in terms of Generation Squeeze. We have published on tax policy issues in the past. We're not a group that recommends a tax on capital gains in housing for a range of reasons that I'm happy to go in with you into more detail about. But we do encourage a focus on a bit of a tax shift. How might we focus on like the 9 or 10% of homes that are valued above $1 million in Canada? How could we ask those homeowners, which includes me, by the way, and the burbs of Metro Vancouver, to contribute more in order to reduce taxes on renters and other low and middle income earners, or invest in other important programs? I
did notice that you mentioned that in your exchange with Mr. Julian last time around, the fact that maybe the threshold should be $1 million. Now, when you talk about a tax shift, what exactly are you talking about?
Oh, well, this is something that I think is gaining momentum amongst a range of parties federally, and with good reason. So a tax shift would talk about how we want to, generally speaking, raise more revenue for governments by taxing things we want less of more, and to tax less on things we want more of. And so move away from relying so heavily on taxing earnings, especially in that middle low income level, and think about, in this case, you know, there's good reason to increase the pricing on pollution. And I want to congratulate your party and your party leader for moving in that direction. I think that's critical to build convergence amongst all parties in Canada right now. And I'm confident it will win you some younger votes. And I would also say taxing wealth. We often hear, I think in particular on the NDP side, more taxing like wealth at the sort of the 20 million range, but there is good reason to be thinking about taxing wealth at a slightly broader part of the population there, thinking about people like me. Houses are hard to hide from the CRA.
Yeah, because
last question, Ed, last question.
Yeah, but focused on the tax shift as it relates to housing, what does that look like? Yeah, say the 9% of Canadians that have homes that are $1 million worth or over. When you talk about tax shift, are you talking about taxing their equity? And if so, that's effectively a home equity tax. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so I tend to interpret people who talk about a home equity tax and are not having a home equity tax right now and introducing that as talking about taxing capital gains, because we already have a strong tradition in Canada to taxing property values. We do that in every city across the country. It happens annually. And what I'm talking about doing is adding what you might call like a progressive surtax on those highest value homes. And it would not be done so much at the municipal level, but we'd be thinking about this provincially or federally. And this is an idea that is, gaining traction with a range of kinds of organizations and groups. And that kind of thinking, to be frank, has emerged in the Solutions Lab.
Okay, we will turn to Mr. McLeod. Michael, 6 minutes. You're muted, Michael. There you go.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the presenters today. My question is for the self-governing Indigenous governments. Whenever we talk about Indigenous governments and refer to Indigenous organizations and Indigenous people that are talking about funding programs, there's NIOs, National Indigenous Organizations, there's LCC, Land Claims Coalition, now there's SGIGs. Everybody kind of has a difficult time understanding the difference. Now, you pointed out, Bertha, that there was a huge challenge for housing. However, recently, a few years ago, there was a $1.5 billion announced for the National Indigenous Organization to provide housing to Indigenous people. How does that work with the self-governing nations? Could you just maybe give us a quick explanation?
Well, as you know, the self-governing Indigenous governments, we're using that label because there's a lot of Indigenous governments across Canada that are Indian Act bands, and we try to differentiate between with the ones that have agreements, self-government agreements. So that's where the SGIG comes in. But because we have a direct relationship with Canada, and it's based on our treaties that that we lobby very hard to make sure that we have that direct relationship with Canada and not through the NIOs that don't speak for us. But in terms of the budget, that $1.5 billion budget that you're asking about, I'll ask Matt to answer that question. Matt is the key technical person on that fiscal work that we're doing. He's one of the several key technical people. So if Matt could just jump in here.
Yeah, so just on the 1.5 billion, when it came to allocating funds to the Northwest Territories, no First Nation communities in the Northwest Territories, except for possibly the Hay River Reserve, were eligible for any of that money. So none of that ended up in Indigenous communities in the Northwest Territories. Other self-governing nations did receive some funding as a result of that, but by the time the resources were allocated, for example, the Carcross-Tagish First Nation received enough funding to build a third of a house a year for 3 years. So it's simply the funds that are being identified to address infrastructure and housing investments in Indigenous communities are simply not reflective of the actual requirements and as some of the presenters were identifying, we're running into some of the same issues in that the cost of addressing those necessary investments because of the national housing circumstances have increased in the last 12 months by 30 to 150%, depending on what region of the country you're in. So the gap is growing faster than the investments, and by the time they're allocated across the country, there's simply not enough for any individual community to make a meaningful.
Can I just interrupt you, Matt, and ask you then, $4.3 billion over 4 years was identified in the budgets for Indigenous Community Infrastructure Fund, and we expect that's where the request that your organization has submitted will receive funding from, pending approval, of course. Now, is that something you expect that will help meet the challenge that the self-governing nations are experiencing, the housing challenges?
We're hopeful that it will, but again, it's going to be very difficult when you look at spreading that funding out over 4 years and across the country. Self-governing nations are prepared, do have sort of a shovel-ready kind of approach to addressing affordable housing in the 29 self-governing First Nation communities, and so we're hopeful that some of that will find its way into our communities, and in particular, optimistic that this time that communities in the Northwest Territories, First Nation communities in the Northwest Territories, will not be left out, thanks to the proposal that self-governing nations have prepared on addressing housing gaps.
And why is it important that the funding be direct? Bertha, in her presentation, stated that the funding should be direct, not through CMHC, but funded directly to Indigenous governments such as the provincial.
Generally, our experience is that programs that are developed by CMHC are designed for reserve circumstances. And when we enter into comprehensive land claim and self-government agreement, we have a different legal structure, different arrangements. And as a result, oftentimes the programs that are rolled out by CMHC may be very well designed for their intended audience, but they don't always fit for self-governing nations. And so that's why we're kind of broken records on this when we come to presenting to people like yourself, is the fact that without a proper self-government lens in the development of programs, it's important to have direct access for those governments so that they can actually design and put in place the services that are necessary to meet the needs of their population.
Yeah, I have one more
Thank you.
question.
We'll let you go. We're a little over, but go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I'll be quick. In the budget, there was $25 million for the government of the Northwest Territories. There was $25 million for Nunavut. For a lot of us, it was an important, immediate step, and we expect that there'll be further discussions on the urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. And I'm wondering if that is different and separate from what you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, we have to remember that there's two different governments that are responsible for the housing, and that's going to the Northwest Territories, which has its own responsibilities and its own significant housing deficits. And so it doesn't necessarily address any of the issues that the Twitcho government are facing in their communities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do have to come in here just for a sec, Mr. Mahaffey. You said a third of a house for for 3 years. That's one house in 3 years. That's not very good, if you ask me. What is causing that? Why are we not getting the money where it needs to go and the houses being built?
I think there is yet to be a full reckoning with the scale of the housing and infrastructure deficit in Indigenous communities. And as a result, the investments that are made don't start to put a dent in that deficit. And the resources, as a result, the resources that are provided are often used up on temporary Band-Aid solutions that don't produce a meaningful result. And so we just continue to throw good money after bad rather than grappling with the scale of the deficit that exists.
Okay, merci. We'll turn to Mr. St. Marie, 6 minutes, Gabriel.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by saying that I am kind of blown away by the last exchange. This is shocking. But on that note, I'd like to welcome all the witnesses to the committee. Thanks for your attendance and for your presentations. I'd also like to say hello to Ms. Kwon, who's with us this afternoon. Now, my questions will be directed at Mr. Tremblay. Mr. Tremblay, the CMHC recently released its annual 2020 report. Are you able to respond to questions that deal with the annual report, sir? Yes, I can do my best, Mr. Chairman. Good. Well, I'm on page 61, where CMHC talks about, the subtitle is our risk profile, and the point is strategic risk, which is considered high, and it refers to the need of affordable housing, which is accentuated by the asymmetric recovery, which may lead to us achieving our goals. And then it goes on, the evolution of the housing market and the mortgage market and the rapid implementation of response programs have heightened pressure on the implementation of the strategy. Could you please elaborate on that? Well, it's more or less what I said at my recent appearance. The increase in prices due to the pandemic, we have low interest rates, and all of this factors in to any strategy to provide affordable housing to all Canadians. There's a whole slew of factors that come into play, and they constitute risks. Thank you. Now, in the next section, you talked about emerging risks. And could you comment on that? The CMHC talks about increasing needs in affordable housing and a structural rebalancing of the housing market. Could you elaborate on that and explain exactly what that means, please? Well, when we refer to intensification, we need more solutions to affordability, but the climate requires a greater intensification in our urban centres. So we sincerely believe that this is one solution to have greater housing supply. And I apologize, but the second part of your question, I don't have the document with me. I should have it, but I don't. Well, no worries. It was structural rebalancing of the housing market, and it refers to a lowering in immigration rates, social changes, telework, and a potential increase in ownership of cooperative housing and other impacts on the rental housing market. And finally, the pandemic has in fact had an impact on the housing market and required it to be able to adapt. Response. Well, on that note, Mr. Chairman, that speaks to a lot of uncertainty, which is the result of the pandemic. We don't know how Canadians are going to react to this. There is a major exodus from the urban areas and they're going to the neighbourhoods. Will that continue? What will happen to downtown cores? Will there be a lot of companies that will enforce a telework principle? And as Ms. Farrer referred to earlier, there are thousands of Canadian renters that are in arrears with their rent payments. How is that going to play out? There are all the things that we have to factor in when we think about our strategy. Question. Well, thank you. I can see that you're paying close attention to all those factors. But for example, has the CMHC got a sense of how telework will endure or persist? As we come out of the pandemic, will it be approximately 50% of the telework we currently observe, 30%, 60%? Have you developed a prognosis of that kind that you can share with us, or is it kind of a preemptive assessment? Well, for the time being, this is just a bit of a sense of what we believe might happen, but it is too soon in the pandemic to determine whether these are long to medium term trends that are being drawn. Well, thank you. Now, earlier in the annual report, and I'm on page 56 now, there's a section that I find highly interesting, and we're seeing this a lot in the Finance Committee. It's a risk analysis that has to do with climate change. Could you please tell us at the CHMC how you factor in risk assessment due to climate change in the housing market across Canada, please? Response. Well, last year we appointed a climate baron, and the climate advocate would be in a better position to respond to that question than me. But what I can tell you, the National Housing Strategy products require a certain level of energy efficiency. And so that's one approach. And we're also looking at the issuance of social coupons and providing a framework to that. So we're looking at a number of incentives when it comes to the climate, as well as the resilience of greening residential housing units. Oh, that's highly interesting. Thank you. Now, as far as the green bonds are concerned, I guess that's what you meant. The CHMC is going to issue green bonds. Is it to fund eco-energy renovation programs or plan projects? Could you elaborate on that, please? Response. Well, we already have Canadian bonds for housing, but it's the same principle. These would be green bonds. Oh, well, that's highly interesting. I hope that we invite you back to discuss that in greater depth in the future. Now, further down in the text, in the annual report, there's a section, Capital Management, page 40. And on page 41, there's a table that lays out the ratios. And between 2019 and 2020, it lists the percentage of capital, which seems to be on the rise. So mortgage, insurance, and so on, it really ballooned. And on the following line, mortgage fund financing and capital available, it refers to financing here. It went up to 262%. Could you tell us how come this ratio increased in a pandemic year? Thank you very
Gabriel.
Oh, pardon.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. One of the main reasons for the increase in the ratios is that in 2020, we suspended the payment of dividends to governments, given the uncertainty in the real estate and housing markets and all the uncertainty that had to do with the pandemic. And as a result of the pandemic, we wanted to ensure that there was enough capital if there were increased losses in the insurance realm. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you both. And following Ms. Kwan will be Mr. Kelly and Jenny. Everybody else got 7 minutes, so you will too. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm delighted to join your committee for today. My first question goes to CMHC. So for CMHC's insured loans of new constructions and acquisitions, CMHC must be satisfied that a property has achieved a projected rent level in order to achieve a loan beyond 70 to 75%. So do these rental achievement requirements need a minimum amount of rent to be met based on the amount of the loan?
Sorry. Just to clarify, are you talking about our multiple underwriting loan insurance or homeowner? Just to clarify the question.
I'm talking about the loan rent programs for multiple units, not for individual homeowners.
Okay, thank you. So in that, yes, we do review the capacity before we underwrite and provide insurance. We do make sure there's a capacity to repay, and that would include both rent, but also operating costs and pro forma financial statements to make sure that there's an ability to pay.
Sorry, my question is there a minimum amount of rent to be met based on the amount of the loan?
Well, so the answer to that would be we can't just look at the rent and the loan. We actually have to look at the operating cost of the buildings and so forth. So it's the capacity of the borrower to be able to repay the loan.
So
rent is obviously a consideration, but it can't be the only thing we look at.
So there's no minimum rent requirements then?
No.
Okay.
There isn't.
CMHC's response to one of my written order paper questions shows a spike starting in 2015 of REITs acquiring existing properties with moderate rent. It also indicated that CMHC does not track rent for insured projects after funding. If rent is not tracked after CMHC provides funding, what safeguards are there in place to prevent REITs from jacking up the prices in the properties that they have acquired, including through rental evictions?
So thank you for the question. So first I'll start by just to set up the context. 30% of Canadians rely on rental housing for their homes. And public and purpose-built rentals, which has not been a very active market over a number of years, which means that the stock is very old. The Rental Construction Finance Initiative has changed that somewhat with the construction over the next several years of 70,000 units. And I do want to point out that the private sector is the largest provider of rental housing, including housing that is affordable in this country. Having said this, you've mentioned REIT specifically. I can tell you that while it has increased, And certainly there are examples where they've bought significant properties over the last several years. But in the large census metropolitan areas of Canada, so Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, in Vancouver, for example, they're still less than 5% of the market. In Toronto, they're less than 15%. And in Montreal, they're less than 10%. As far as our mortgage loan insurance support to that, we do want to encourage new construction and purchases and refinancing. But we have tightened our rules in May of last year to restrict the use of funds for refinancing purposes to make sure that it's supply and preservation of housing.
Yeah, so CMHC doesn't track the rent though, and you also don't have a minimum rent requirement. So then really, because you're trying to ensure that the project works, so that means the higher the rents, the more likely the project's going to work. So it doesn't really provide for more affordable rental stock, if you will. So CMHC doesn't have that policy to ensure that that's in place. And then there are no safeguards in place to prevent REITs from jacking up the prices in properties, because that's the result of the programs. It doesn't really provide the affordability measures that I think is required.
We do, so two things to that. We do have a multiple insurance product that is for more affordable housing, so they do get a additional premium for that. And again, this is more about ensuring that there is supply in the market, because as the solutions is more supply, and the more we restrict supply, the harder it's going to be for affordability purposes. So there is a trickle-down effect that happens when rents, and again, these buildings that are being purchased are sometimes very, very old, and the alternative is sometimes not better.
I'm going to turn to Leilani, actually, on the next question. If CMHC is increasingly providing insured loans for the acquisition of existing moderate rent properties, is it likely that these acquisitions are contributing to the increased cost of rent?
Well, we know that the business model of REITs requires an escalation of rents. The way it works, as I understand it, and please everyone realize I am a human rights lawyer. I am not like, this is, what I've learned over time. So bear that in mind. But as I understand it, the way it works is real estate investment trusts rely on investors, often institutional investors like pension funds, for example, insurance companies, that kind of thing. And, if you're an investor, you kind of want to know that you're going to get a good return on your investment. And REITs generally will provide somewhere around, 8% is expected, let's say. And so the way that the REIT guarantees that a good return on your investment is they show how they're going to generate income. The way they generate income is through rents. And they need to show sort of a progression. And that means a certain amount of tenant turnover, because it's generally, based on provincial territorial law, necessary to get tenants out in order to raise rents. The only other way, is above guideline rent increases, which they do as well. So they'll do these modest renovations, often not the kind of renovations that I think Michelle would like to see and that CMHC would like to see, like, fulsome renovations, more sort of, we call them sometimes IKEA renovations, so they're like modest and not always necessary. And then they use that to apply for above guideline rent increases. So, but you have to understand, it's really part of the business model. So it's not just like, like they're being mean. That's their business. The business is to create profits for their investors, and pension funds need a good return on their investment, and so that's how it's structured.
Yeah, and they also have to meet the CMHC requirements, which of course is to justify that they can actually meet the requirements in terms of the loan with CMHC, which also means that they have to increase the rent in order to meet that requirement.
Well, I think
That'll be the
Michelle
last
is,
question, Jenny.
and I think Michelle is better placed to answer that. But I do think that CMHC could be saying back to REITs that get loans from them, they could be saying, we're going to give you this loan on these conditions. And I think they could make it a condition, for example, no rent increases for 5 years, like that. I mean, Denmark has a law like that, the country, Denmark. They don't have a body like CMHC, but I don't see why CMHC couldn't do something like that.
Okay, we will, and you will be back on a little later, Jenny. Turning to Mr. Kelly, followed by Ms. Zerowitz. 5-minute rounds or a little bit more, Pat.
Great. We've had some fascinating testimony so far, and the last meeting that we had with CMHC and Dr. Kershaw was also quite fascinating. On the topic, I'd like to pick up some more or less where Mr. Fast left off with Dr. Kershaw. So at the end, I think I heard you say that yes, indeed, Generation Squeeze has taken a position in favor of a tax on real estate wealth, and that they're as part of a tax shift away from the incomes, the incomes of younger people, and into taxing the wealth of primarily older Canadians. Could you give me some detail of what you would recommend this kind of real estate wealth tax would look like?
A couple of key observations. First, I think one would aim to do is to make a tax shift that benefits the vast majority. So how could we get 80 or 90% of Canadians better off either by paying lower taxes or receiving larger benefits from government investments? And so that would be your primary goal. And then consistent with conversations that are happening more and more at the federal level, and this is across a number of parties that are being represented today, think about asking those with more means to contribute. And we can have an interesting conversation about, do you want to go after the people who have like the 1% of wealth, the 2% of wealth, the 5% of wealth? I think given where we're at these days.
Okay, but you're sorry if I may.
Please.
What's implied by this is that it's the wealth itself that is largely, for most Canadians, in the form of real estate equity that ought to be taxed, as opposed to a person's income. So how would that look?
There are a range of policy mechanisms that could have that, could facilitate that. And one of the things we definitely want to do is to defend against the risk that someone who has a high value home, but generally, more modest income, would not suddenly be at risk of needing to leave her home. And so what you would do is you would, think about how do you calculate the additional minor tax we're asking people to contribute over the years that they're living in their home. And there'd be the possibility to defer it, just as every province right now offers most seniors the opportunity to defer their property taxes until the sale.
Would a person report to the Canada Revenue Agency their status as a homeowner and its assessed value each year, or how would you recommend to federal policymakers that they address this?
So there are a range of ways to consider it. In any format, it's likely that either provincial or federal governments would need to be collaborating with the provincial housing authority that already on an annual basis assesses everyone's homes for the purpose of collecting property taxes. You would then be honing in on the high value homes that meet your threshold, 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%, and potentially a deferrable annual tax could be put on there in order to do two things. Let's just remember, what's the intention? First, the key intention has to be, how do we slow down the growth of home prices in this province this country that's leaving earnings behind? If a pandemic-induced recession is unable to slow down home prices, then we need to concede that, perhaps unintentionally, but nevertheless, our housing system is designed to tolerate home prices leaving earnings behind. And so we'd like to think about what are the policy mechanisms to help slow that down, and signaling, hey, right now we shelter, high-value homes from taxation the way that we don't shelter other kinds of assets. That incentivizes people to treat that as a way to make a good return, not just have an affordable home. How can we close that a little bit? And that's a key first point. And then as a salutary benefit, it's going to collect some additional revenue that we could then invest into building more purpose-built rental, especially when it's green, co-op housing, et cetera.
Okay, how much income, how much real estate equity tax would have to be raised by the federal government to achieve the kinds of policy suggestions that you have also made, such as well, the increasing benefits or reducing taxes for young Canadians? How much money would you recommend, or would you suggest to a federal government that they try to raise with this kind of tax that you're proposing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked it quite that way before. I don't think we've ever supplied that kind of precise answer. So if that's something that your party is interested in considering, I'd be delighted to follow up and would be prepared to create a briefing note for sure and could share it as well.
Don't misunderstand me. It's actually the other party that is funded, whose Crown Corporation has funded your study. And so I think
we should be very careful about the optics there. I know that's a really good slogan for a campaign that may happen later this spring or next year, but that is not in any way accurate.
Well, I merely point that out is when you suggested that I may want to adopt that or suggest it for my platform. But
it's worth considering though for your platform. Like, in all honesty, you are a party that definitely wants to be helping, the regular folks. That's a big part of your narrative. I'm proposing a tax shift that could help you do just that.
Well, indeed, there is much in your opening statement that I agree with, and I'm actually really there. There's nothing partisan in this. I'm fascinated by the take that you have had, and if I have time, I actually would like to go back to your opening statement on
Let's do it.
Last Tuesday. You characterized foreign investors, money launderers, speculators, NIMBYists, developers, landlords, realtors, all as the low-hanging fruit that Canadians blame for rising real estate prices, while ignoring, I guess, and this was right where the bells went. You were interrupted.
Yeah, it was. I was in such a
moment.
Housing rendition there.
And so I'm really quite interested to know. I would argue, and I spent over 20 years in the mortgage business. I'm familiar with a lot of these arguments, and I would suggest that none of that fruit is particularly low hanging, and few of it has actually been addressed by any level of government. Yes, a little bit around the edges in some of them, but it is your contention, though, that none of those factors are the primary one to blame, but tax incentives for homeownership. Is that?
No, I think that would be a mischaracterization. Okay. And let me be clear, while some fruit may be lower hanging than other things, we need to be picking all of that fruit. We desperately need to be using every tool in our toolbox to address this crisis of housing unaffordability and a lack of sustainability.
Before the chair cuts me off,
you were well over Pat, but we'll give you one. We're lucky we get ample time tonight. This is the last question.
Well, one in your statement that I don't think you mentioned it, but maybe you did. But is a very part of what we've studied at this committee is monetary policy, and other witnesses have talked about the incentives there, both to not just to institutional lenders, but to institutional borrowers, but to regular borrowers, any borrower really. Could you comment on fiscal or monetary policy, or if the chair won't let you in a different round, maybe later?
Yeah, and this is really critical. So let me kick this succinct. Monetary policy, I think, is something that's captured more and more of our attention in the past year during the pandemic in terms of its collateral damage to housing unaffordability. A key thing to start with would be to invite Statistics Canada to review how it actually measures the inflation of, quote, owned accommodation. Right now, it is doing a relatively poor job of capturing the total amount of inflation in home prices. And then its measure of CPI gives governments like ours today, and even to some degree, a risk for the Bank of Canada, not the most accurate information. I'd love to go into that in more detail. That's a theme that is definitely emerging in the Solutions Lab.
Okay, thank you both. That was a wide-ranging discussion, if I do say so. We'll go to Ms. Sirowitz, who will be followed by Mr. St. Marie and Ms. Kwan. Julie, you'll have about 6 minutes.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. And I think, Mr. Chair, we should let the record show that Mr. Kelly ask for a briefing note on tax on capital gains. I'm just nudging you, Mr. Kelly. Anyways, Mr. Kershaw, I'm actually going to start off very quickly with also a statement I think you started out in your last session that you were with us, where you had started off, I think without being asked actually, by indicating that there's nobody from our current government, whether it is a cabinet minister or anybody, that has asked Generation Squeeze or yourself for any tax policy advice. Can you confirm that that is true?
That is true. And let me just add, I mean, the reason that this has become a little more of a media issue and an issue before this committee is that when we were extending our invitations to people to participate in our solutions lab, we had some generic material and we issued it to about 70 different people representing a range of groups. Because as we did anticipate, we went after people who were experts on monetary policy. So I had to tell them, like, why, if you're an expert on monetary policy, would you come to this housing issue? And we invited some people who are interested in co-ops, and so we told them. We also went to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, people who knew would be probably very skeptical about some of the ideas that Mr. Kelly is skeptical about, and invited them to come and participate. In the process of doing so, we wanted to make clear why we'd invite a tax group to a solutions lab on housing, and that they then have taken that material and mischaracterized the idea that we'd be focusing exclusively on taxation, because that's what we emphasized in their invitation. And that has been the origin of this little media brouhaha.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kershaw. And then Mr. Tremblay, just to make sure that this is crystal clear as well, CMHC does not, by law, offer advice on tax policy to the federal government. Can you confirm that?
I can confirm that, yes.
Thank you. And then I want to continue with you. One of the biggest issues in my riding of Davenport, so downtown West Toronto, it's not only affordable housing, which is a huge issue, and they're very big supporters of co-ops in my riding as well. I will say to you that housing affordability is a huge issue. So 43% of my riding are people born outside of Canada. They're immigrants, so they want their kids to own homes. It's very much what they push for. The federal government had introduced the first-time home buyers incentive. Has that been helpful in helping young people buy their first homes? If you could just maybe talk to that for about 30 seconds or so.
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The as of March 31st, 2021, it has helped nearly 11,000 Canadians household access houses with a lower monthly payment, including approximately 60 million in Alberta and $60 million in Quebec. It has been less successful, obviously, in the large urban areas like Toronto and Vancouver. I believe it was today the federal government, or yesterday the federal government did announce some enhancement to the first-time home buyer in both Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria census metropolitan areas, which will kind of allow the maximum house prices to go from memory, $505,000 to $722,000. So there are obviously some possibilities of more take up now in those cities.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Tremblay. And then I think I'm going to shift over to Ms. Farah. Thanks so much for your presentation. Lots of information there, and I wish, like Mr. Kershaw had sort of ended with, I wish we had more time to get into the monetary aspects, just because, to be honest, the reality is I think in an unprecedented pandemic, there were a series of measures taken to try to continue to provide a solid foundation for our economy, and it had unintended consequences. And I think that is the broader story, and I wish we had more time to get into it. But I also want to say thanks for pointing out that there's some fiscal aspects and some fiscal policy aspects that you think the federal government could be moving on to sort of address some of the issues around housing in Canada. I really appreciated you pointing out the issue around rate. If you have any other things, I know you're a lawyer, but if you have any other ideas that you might want to put forward to us, I'd be grateful if you could submit that to the committee. We don't have time to go through it right now, but very important that we also hear about it. The question I do want to ask you about, and this is something that I think about all the time, in downtown Toronto, a huge issue of why the house prices are so high, in my opinion, is that we have such limited supply. And supply can actually be freed up by our provincial level, and they hold a lot of the powers around housing as well. And I want maybe for you to address a couple of things. Do you agree that there is a role also for the provinces in terms of maybe increasing the supply, like around zoning? That's one, and also protecting tenant rights. So if you could maybe address that.
Yeah, I mean, that too is a huge issue. And a lot of people have taken as an assumption that supply is the problem, a lack of supply. I query that, to be honest. I'm not saying that we don't need more deeply affordable housing supply. We do. But do we need just more supply? I'm not so certain. And can we access deeply affordable supply based on stuff that actually already exists? Maybe. And should we be protecting existing affordable supply? Most definitely. So the supply question is
it's actually a provincial question. Do they also play a role in helping to resolve this issue?
Well, obviously, housing is a technically and constitutionally a provincial and territorial jurisdiction. But as Mr. Kershaw, Mr. Tremblay, and myself have already indicated, monetary and fiscal policy, which is squarely within national level government, plays a huge role. One thing I just want to say about all of this is, first of all, I understand why the Bank of Canada set interest rates low and engaged in quantitative easing. And that's like every government did that at the start of the pandemic, right? And that was to kickstart or to keep the economy going. Super important. But what you need then are fiscal policies to protect the most vulnerable. So you've got your monetary policy. I'm not quibbling with that. I'm not going to take on the Central Bank of Canada right now. But I would say, let's look at the fiscal policies that could be supporting tenants. And what can the national level government do in that regard? Recognizing that landlord-tenant relations are provincial matters, but also recognizing that the federal government has the spending power and can rightly use that spending power. I mean, the federal government could, in fact, do something around rent relief for the 250,000 households who are in arrears. It's diddly squat money in the big picture, right? It's like $300 million of rental arrears, something like that. I mean, the national level government gave banks $750 billion to protect mortgages. So, which I'm not dealing with either. I want people's mortgages to be protected. I think that's super important. So I don't think that during a pandemic, it makes sense to be drawing bright lines. And it seems there's some inconsistency around that. So the federal government didn't draw a bright line around healthcare and what was federal jurisdiction and what was provincial jurisdiction, nor should it have, right? I wanted my federal government to get in there and get ventilators. Who didn't, right? And similarly, I don't see why they have to draw a bright line with renter households. They didn't with commercial rentals, right? There's a program, and a good program, an important program for those who can't pay their commercial rent leases. So why is the bright line where renter households?
And
Okay, sorry guys, we're going to have to.
My time has ended. I just want to mention. I just want to say, Mr. Easter, I just didn't want anybody to think that I was saying, well, it's all their fault.
No.
I think it's a complexity of the issue, and I think we have to appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, but we got that. We'll go to about 4 minutes each to Mr. St. Marie and Ms. Kwan. Gabriel?
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with a general comment for Ms. Farah. I am a Member of Parliament for the Bloc Québécois, and when it's Quebec and provincial areas of jurisdiction, we want full autonomy in healthcare. What we want is Ottawa to do what it previously did, and that is fund healthcare and leave it up to us to make decisions. When there are joint projects such as roads, infrastructure, well, it takes 2 or 3 years, regardless of which government or party is in power. It requires a framework agreement. It takes 3-4 years for each project. The money is voted on and the process is cumbersome and slow, and that's why we want autonomous government. But now let me turn back to my questions for Mr. Tremblay. I'd like to hear your reaction regarding a government budget measure concerning the 1% tax for residential real estate holdings by foreigners that are vacant. Has the CMHC taken a close look at that? I know that BC already does it for a number of reasons, Vancouver Island. Now, in the opinion of the CMHC, is this a measure that works well and will help to reduce the costs of rent? Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This tax was the decision of the finance minister, and I must say from the outset, but this measure will have an impact, but I don't think it necessarily will have a major impact. Now, if the property belongs to a foreign individual and that individual or that company rents out the residence, we have no issue with that because we are all aware of the fact that any offer is a good offer. Of course, it has to be the right kind of housing according to the right needs in those cities and those areas. But I would go so far as to say that there are far more Canadian investors, individuals, companies who rent out properties than foreign investors actually do. Well, thank you. Well, if I'm not mistaken, the measure related to vacant housing units. I don't know whether Ms. Farah wanted to respond to that. I could see that she raised her hand. Go ahead.
Yes, and I could see Mr. Kershaw was nodding the same way I was. I think well, I shouldn't speak for Mr. Kershaw, but I agree with what Mr. Tremblay said, which is that this tax, I thought it was an interesting little move. It was a little thing. It's a tinkering. I think it's maybe a little bit of a red herring. I don't think it's going to generate, even the government itself said it wouldn't generate that much money over 5 years, 700 million or something. And that's not a lot. And really, I mean, I've seen those moves. The government of New Zealand did that, for example. Singapore has a similar thing in place. It's not that effective for curbing the uber commodification or financialization of housing. As I said in my 5-minute comments, there are other threats, and they're domestic threats, and it's the use of pension funds and real estate investment trusts and the big asset management firms that are really putting pressure on renter households. So. I thought it was interesting, though, because it shows that the government is willing to look at some fiscal policies. It's a beginning of looking at fiscal policy and its implications for the housing crisis.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Kershaw, you wanted to add something?
To learn from the BC context, one of the things that the BC government does to contextualize our speculation and vacancy tax here is to point out that it applies to well under 1% of homes in the province. So it is a tool. It should be used, but let's be clear, it's not a particularly large signal to the housing market as we have a much broader problem of home prices leaving earnings behind.
Okay, ben merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have. Thank you.
Et vous êtes en sourdine.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kwan, about 4 minutes, followed by Mr. Falk.
Thank you. Ms. Farah, you wrote to the government back in March of 2020, calling on them to create an acquisition fund to support community housing providers in acquiring properties at risk of being bought up by REITs and large capital funds. Have you received a response from the government?
Thanks for that question. I wrote that correspondence in my capacity as United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, and no, I did not receive a formal response to that.
I see. And we didn't see any action from the government in the upcoming budget with respect to that as well.
Well, wait, actually, if I might, I mean, I think that the Rapid Housing Initiative was somewhat related to that, is my understanding. It's not what I had envisioned. I actually thought that national level government I actually felt that the government and CMHC should do the acquisitions. And then because they have the power the fiscal power and the know-how in CMHC's case, they would have this body of public assets, and they could then determine what to do with them, work with community organizations, or figure out. And not all of them would have to remain public assets, but that was what I had proposed. But I know it's true, I didn't hear back directly on that.
Right, and what the government done with the RHI does not allow for the acquisition of existing housing. So it's a little bit different in terms of what I'm talking about.
That's right.
Here.
It has to be repurposed.
Exactly. On the issue, as you noted in your presentation, 250,000 renters or rental households are in arrears at risk of evictions. Do you think that the federal government should develop a national eviction standards that reinforces the right to housing and provide rental supports as has been done for commercial rent?
Well, there's the National Housing Strategy Act, which says that the federal government's housing policy recognizes that housing is a basic human right, and as defined under international human rights law, and that the government will do what it must to progressively realize that right. I don't see how they can get around not doing something to protect renter households. I actually thought, and I put that in the letter of March 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought the federal government should have come out very strongly and clearly calling for an eviction moratorium. And they said, well, that's provincial jurisdiction. I still think the federal government could have showed leadership and should still be showing that kind of leadership. It's very scary what's happening in this country right now around rental arrears. 250,000 households. You have to understand that's at least 500,000 people. That's many children. That's single mothers. That's Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, newcomers, refugees. We do not want those people on the streets of Canada or living in cars or in parks. I mean, this is very serious stuff. And I think in light of the pandemic and the health risk to the individual, family, and then the broader community, I think the government has no choice, the federal government has no choice but to do something if they want to really breathe life into the National Housing Strategy Act and their commitment to the right to housing.
Last question, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yes, of course, to protect people from actually end up being homeless. My last question will be for Ms. Zoe and Mr. Mahaffrey. It was shocking in terms of the exchange that we heard, which of course we saw the lack of priority from the government in providing the absolutely necessary resources to support Indigenous housing, particularly in the urban, rural and remote and northern communities. So one of the issues that's been brought up to the government over and over again is the lack of a urban, rural and northern Indigenous housing strategy for Indigenous by Indigenous. And when you raise this issue, they point to the idea that somehow 40% of the RHI went to Indigenous housing. So therefore it's all good. So I wonder if I could get Ms. Zoe and Mr. Mahaffrey to comment on that and what it is that you need for the government to do. Do we need a urban, rural, northern Indigenous housing strategy for Indigenous by Indigenous as an example, and along with it with the necessary funding to back it up so that we can actually see real change in terms of meeting the housing needs?
Ms. So or Mr. Mahaffrey?
Yeah,
Mr. Mahaffrey?
I think the issue there's a whole bunch of issues, right? And it goes back to sort of previous comments of so significant percentages of these funds do oftentimes make their way to Indigenous communities, but the gap is so large. And as you mentioned, if you don't actually make a meaningful change in the housing stock and the infrastructure that supports it, what happens is you end up just patching over holes. And so you're spending all of your resources and all of your capacity basically trying to prevent the problem from getting worse instead of fixing it. And that's the challenge. And I think, from a self-government standpoint, what we would say is that what we need is a strategy that targets that targets specifically self-governing communities, because, as I said, we have a very different legal context than reserve communities. We often have jurisdiction that extends beyond just our treaty lands, so that covers our citizens throughout a far broader geographic area. So, for example, in the Yukon, most jurisdiction is for citizens wherever they are in the Yukon Territory, not just within the community or within treaty lands. So, and we've started to see some success in working with Crown Indigenous Relations, where we work to collaboratively develop solutions. And I think when it comes, I can't speak to what the answer is for the on-reserve communities and non-self-governing urban nations, but for the nations that we're working with, I think we need a specific strategy that's collaboratively developed with Canada, with the various departments and parties.
Okay, thank you all. We'll go on to Mr. Falk, followed by Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you.
Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for coming to committee again. Mr. Kershaw, I'd like to begin with you at least anyway, and I'm looking at the executive summary in your project charter, and there you talk about the playing field being inequitable and uneven. Can you tell me what you mean by inequitable?
Well, there's a few ways in which the inequitable theme plays out. So on the one hand, a range of public policies subsidize homeowners to accumulate wealth, and we don't have the associated corresponding subsidies for renters. And so that is an inequality in society. To the degree that we have been recognizing that home prices have been leaving behind earnings, and we've been slow to address that or indicate that it's a concern or a problem, that reflects an inequity where we're not as keen to tell people who've made gains in their homes that, oh, we might want to slow that down because it's hurting your kids and grandchildren. So that would be another kind of problem. And of course, these intergenerational tensions and tensions between owners and renters also intersect with a range of other power dynamics related to class and race and newcomer status and so on, and gender. And so again, that would be another range of inequality.
Okay. I often have discussions with my kids, and I'm always perplexed how they have this assumption that when they leave my roof or my home and are no longer under my roof, that for some odd reason they can maintain the same lifestyle that I've accustomed them to after being in the workforce for 40 years and accumulating a degree of wealth and income.
I love this question.
And I have to remind them that, you know, you actually have to work for some things in life. You shouldn't be able to afford a house like I can afford, or drive a car like I can afford to drive. And I'm almost getting the sense from the executive summary that you're suggesting there's too big a gap.
Mr. Falk, this is a great question. And no, I don't think you're reading the executive summary clearly enough, but here are the facts of the matter. If you're a young person today, you're going to go to school years longer and incur so much more student debt than somebody your age did in the past, to land jobs that, after you adjust for inflation, pay thousands of dollars less for full-time work, and then face a housing situation where your rent will be on the rise and your chance to actually get into the housing market as an owner is so much more out of reach. A typical young Canadian back when my mom started in the housing system had to work 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average price home. Now across Canada, you'd need to work 14 years on average. Of course, it's worse in Ontario and BC and worse in Victoria, Toronto, and Vancouver. In other words, Mr. Falk, hard work from your kids does not pay off like it used to. And that is the quintessential issue that we need our public policymakers to respond to, because we want hard work to pay off like it used to. And we need to adapt policies to help ensure that some hard work gets at least to approximate the return it did back in the day. So your kids have reason to definitely be angry at you when you say those sorts of things, because that dismisses the very harmful economic situation they have inherited by comparison with you.
Well, that's
Ted, I tell mine, you don't need a new washing machine and dryer. Buy a used one like we did.
Exactly. There's lots of options. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is not the case that young people are spending too much on their cell phones or their avocado toast or their coffee, which is why they can't save a down payment for an average home in this country. It's because we have tolerated home prices literally doubling or tripling over the last several decades.
Okay.
And we did
I'm
that
just
'cause
about
of
out of time, but I want to get another question in. Bank of
Great.
Canada has targeted 2% as the inflation rate. We know we're edging to 3%. We know that these low interest rates are a big cause for an escalation in home prices, which actually compound or quadruple the problem for young folks. What's your comment on on the Bank of Canada's monetary policy?
Well, the Bank of Canada has this primary responsibility to try and keep inflation in range. So we understand that, and to Ms. Farha's observations earlier, we need to create space for them to do it, but we need our governments to then think, how do we deflect the collateral damage of that low interest rate policy into the housing system? That's where we need more and more of your attention, and it's going to start, I think, with a review of how StatsCan is actually measuring our CPI, our rate of inflation, and particularly how it's measuring the inflation of owned accommodation. I really push all of you to go and look at this. This is something the Business Council of BC has been urging for some time, and we are downplaying the degree to which home prices are inflating, and so we're not capturing that in our 2% or 3% benchmark that you were referring to, Mr. Pong.
We get time for one more, Ted, if you want one.
I'll sure. Ms. Faha, you had mentioned that the banks received $750 billion to subsidize their mortgage guarantees. Do you have a breakdown of which banks received how much?
No, I don't actually. And my point about that goes actually to Paul's point about the different support we provide to homeowners versus renters. I actually, at the time when I heard that banks were going to be provided with this cushion, I had mixed reaction as a human rights lawyer. I mean, on the one hand, I was like, yeah, because I don't want homeowners to be suffering and to not be able to pay their mortgage and then to have foreclosure happen. And I especially don't want foreclosures of single family homes, because that makes those homes prey for those institutional investors that I was talking about. And we do not want to see in this country what we saw in the US after the 2008 financial crisis. So I was like, okay, I do think that banks have their own profits, and I'm not exactly sure why they couldn't sort of harness their own profits, but whatever. I was pleased to see that the government was moving to ultimately protect homeowners. But the reason I raised that was to say, look, as I understand it, the rental arrears amounts right now, and it's probably, my data is a couple months out of date. So, but I think it's somewhere around 300 million. So 300 million versus 750 billion, right? And that's renters. And I'm telling you, I work very closely with city officials across this country from about 16 different municipalities, mayors, city councilors, and housing departments. And they are very fearful because they're on the front lines of this, right? They don't want to see an increase in homelessness. They're already having these problems with encampments. They don't know what to do about them. So that was my point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Interesting discussions. We'll go to Mr. Frakaskatis, followed by Ms. Jansen, and Ms. Petrakis will wrap it up. Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for their time this afternoon. Mr. Tremblay, in July of last year, the former CEO of CMHC, Evan Seidel, and he'll be known to our colleagues, he came to our committee many times, said the following on social media. Quote, the suggestion that CMHC is funding a study on any tax measure is inaccurate and misleading reporting. We are co-funding a solution lab on housing wealth and inequality. We do not control the agenda nor the research base, which is a minor component of the protocol. Is that still the position of CMHC now?
Mr. Chair, yes, that is still our position. Again, a solutions lab by its very nature doesn't start with a solution. It starts with a housing challenge, and Dr. Kershaw has done a great job over the last two meetings defining what the problem they were looking at.
Yeah, and the ideas generated in the solutions labs because there are a number of these that are all available online. They are varied, Mr. Chair. There's a number of different focuses. I would point my colleagues, in particular my Conservative colleagues, who seem so, to use Mr. Kelly's words, fascinated with this particular subject. Again, all online. The one that stood out to me is called the Solutions Lab on Affordable Housing. It was supported by the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, the Ottawa Social Housing Network, and SHS Consulting. Among other things, they advised the following, that in order to promote affordable housing, quote, there is a need to allow the private sector to more easily meet the needs of the community. The Solutions Lab further suggests that there is a need to remove barriers and create new opportunities for innovation in land use planning. If I was just looking at those quotes in isolation, Mr. Chair, I would think that they were put forward in the National Post. I would think that they were put forward in the Financial Post by Conservative politicians. So I just I caution my colleagues, because to make an issue here, to draw in an advocacy group, paint an imaginary line to the federal government, try to turn this committee into some sort of partisan enterprise, and when we could be focusing on serious things, unless it is indeed the ambition of my colleagues in the Conservative Party to cultivate ties with Mr. Kershaw so he can advise the Conservative Party on housing policy. Again, they do have a real fascination with him. Mr. Kelly has also said that he agrees with a number of the points that Mr. Kershaw has said. Those discussions can continue, but not at the committee level. This is a nonpartisan committee, and if the Conservatives want the advice of Mr. Kershaw, then again, that can be explored outside of the committee. My final question will go to Ms. Farha, if I could. The Rapid Housing Initiative, as you know, Ms. Farha, is something that the government invested in last year. It's been renewed now in budget 2021. Just a question on modular housing. This is something that's really been promoted as part of the policy. What do you think about modular housing? Is it something that that really needs to be pushed forward by the government, or continue to be pushed forward by the government? In London, Ontario, where I am, there has been a number of new units built, modular units built, and they go up very fast. It helps to address affordability challenges. A lot of potential here, but I'd love your thoughts as well on the record.
To be honest, whatever works. And if the residents are finding that modular housing is meeting their affordability needs and their security of tenure needs, then that's cool. I mean, that's what the right to housing is about. So it's not really for me to dictate, oh, you got to do this, you got to go down this road or this road. If modular is being built quickly and is affordable, and as I said, offers good security of tenure, then you're in the door with the right to housing. And so, of course, I would support that. I do think that there's a whole lot of things that could be done, though, that modular is one. I think there's other things that can be done to ensure that people are well housed and adequately housed who really need it. And I just want to give a shout out to the City of London that's doing very interesting things to deal with homelessness in particular, taking what they call a compassionate approach, which most cities don't, and in this country or around the world. And London's doing some really interesting things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both, Ms. Farah. You're doing well. Peter usually mentioned London 3 times in a meeting, so you mentioned it twice. We'll go to Ms. Jansen and followed by Ms. Katrakis, and we might have a minute or 2 left. Ms. Jansen?
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Tremblay, I know the charter between CMHC and Generation Squeeze has been mentioned numerous times, and I noticed that in there it states, and here I'm going to quote, there's an inequitable and uneven playing field for younger and older generations in the housing market, one that is hindering current Government of Canada goals to create affordable housing opportunities for Canadians. Now, it goes on to state that a key source is tax policy that privileges home ownership and shelters housing wealth, especially in principal residences. Can you understand how, based on these core statements, that this project looks tailor-made to find one solution and one solution only, a tax on your home value?
Mr. Chair, again, I'll reiterate, Solutions Lab doesn't start with a solution, but starts with a problem that we're trying to solve or that the groups are trying to solve. It brings numerous people together to have discussions, to investigate, to analyze this. Again, it has no predetermined conclusion. I don't know how much clearer I could be.
Okay, well, I wonder if you could continue explaining to me, for instance, how it mentions a key source, but it mentions no other key sources. And I know I live down in the Fraser Valley, and we know that government here adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of a new home by way of zoning regulations, development charges, and housing limits. We know here in the Fraser Valley, I think the CD Howe did a study, and they said that it adds $644,000 to a home, to the cost of a home. And I was thinking about Mr. Kershaw's comment that we should be taxing $1 million homes because, you know, those are crazy valuable homes hiding wealth. But actually, if you take that $644,000 worth of government regulations off, it's a $350,000 home. I wonder, you know, when you mention key sources, would you agree that government red tape is a massive problem that's making the rise in housing prices, besides, like you say, also monetary policy?
So, Mr. Chair, obviously there are a lot of costs involved in housing. In the BC area and the Greater Vancouver area, for example, land is a critical cost as well. It makes up to 80% of the cost of a housing unit. And certainly, the more we encourage supply and reduce red tape, it will certainly reduce and first of all increase supply and eventually reduce prices. I would say that there is a dichotomy there where the reasons certain cities in the BC area have a lot of development charges and so forth is because they do not want to raise property taxes of existing homeowners. So they have needed to find a different source of revenue, and unfortunately, they've decided to tax new supply more than other areas of the country.
Well, I was looking at Canada's situation in regards to permits, and I noticed that it takes 250 days to get a permit in Canada. So that's 3 times longer than our competitors in the US that takes 168 days. We're also, I think we're 34th out of 35th of OECD countries to be able to get project approvals in a timely fashion. Again, the idea that, we're sheltering wealth and doing a study on that and the idea of taxing $1 million home, rather than tackling the fact that red tape is truly getting in the way of us being able to ensure that we work on housing affordability. Mr. Tremblay?
So Mr. Chair, again, this is only one solutions lab. As was mentioned, we have other solutions lab, and we do have other research projects as well as other conversations with other parties, and we all need both the federal government, the provincial government, municipal governments, private sector, nonprofit. We all need to push together towards affordability. The federal government can't do it alone. Municipalities can't do it alone. Nonprofits can't do it alone. I think we all have to work together. So I'm not disputing any of what's been said here.
And I have
Kershaw,
another.
Mr.
I do have
Kershaw
another
wanted,
question. I do have another question for
Mr.
CMHC.
Kershaw wanted in here on this one, and then we'll come back to you.
Could he go on the end, because I do have one more question on for Mr. Tremblay from
Okay,
CMHC.
we'll let him in the end. Go ahead.
Thank you. Audrey Ann Colomb, a spokeswoman, was quoted as saying, the objective is to identify solutions that could level the playing field between renters and owners. Now, unfortunately, these sorts of statements don't acknowledge that homeowners pay a huge portion of their income in taxes to 3 levels of government before they can even save for a down payment. There's no acknowledgement of the cost of owning a home, like maintenance, repairs, and insurance, let alone any renovations that enhance the value of the property. Do you think Canadians who take on the risk and responsibility of home ownership should be penalized for doing all that hard work?
Mr. Chair, I do not think that. But if Canadians think that housing is an investment, we do not have a lot of other vehicles in Canada where we permit somebody to buy a house with 5% down and be able to. And yes, there's other costs for sure. I don't dispute any of that. It's just that we can't dispute that there's an imbalance as well in terms of tax treatment for renters versus homeowners.
Okay, and Mr. Kershaw, I said I'd let you in, and you might want to comment on a couple of those questions.
Yes, working in reverse order. So, I mean, if we're wanting to think about the ways in which homeowners work hard to buy their homes, absolutely correct. And do they pay to 3 levels of government in their taxes? So, absolutely correct. But so do renters. They pay also their taxes to 3 levels of government, and they work hard to pay for their rental homes. And what we don't have for renters is the equivalent of a home buyer's tax incentive or a home buyer's tax credit or RSP deductions you can use that are tax sheltered to pay for your down payment. You can't use that for your rent. And I would definitely encourage Ms. Jansen and the Conservative Party, if you're looking to get a briefing note on the ways in which we subsidize homeowners over renters, there'd be a range of people, myself included, who could help you better understand that problem area. And if you want to characterize CMHC as somehow being singularly focused on funding a study to look at taxation issues, I invite you to ask Mr. Tremblay to tell you how much money do they put into the supply challenge? How much money do they put into other parts of the research area that's related to supply? It would make the money going into this particular solutions lab a rounding error. And so to suggest that somehow CMHC has become this meta entity to be investing in research about taxation wildly mischaracterizes how CMHC is using its budget.
Okay, we are going to end that round there, and we'll go to Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for your very interesting testimony and great conversation this afternoon. There seems, I will continue with the CMHC and the National Housing Strategy and Solutions Labs, as there seems to be a lot of interest here this afternoon. So from what I see, there seems to be a misunderstanding around the purpose of CMHC Solutions Labs and their relationship with the federal government policy. Mr. Tremblay, can I ask you to outline exactly what Solutions Labs are and provide an overview of some of the other projects and organizations that you've dealt with through this program and that have been approved through Solutions Lab?
Thank you. So again, a Solutions Lab is meant to start with a challenge, a housing challenge that we're trying to get some insight on. From there, participants are invited. So again, from various sectors. In the case of Dr. Kershaw's, as he mentioned, we invited builders, developers, and so forth. But in other cases, it could be nonprofit. It could be front-facing people if we're dealing with issues with shelters for victims of family violence, for example. So it brings all walks of life. And then from there, it looks for solutions, and the solutions could be, in this case, we're talking potential policy recommendations, but it could be a new technology, it could be a best practice in various things. I do invite, as a member mentioned, I don't have all the details of participants in all the labs, but all of our Solutions Lab are actually on our website, the ones we've funded. And I'll also say that housing affordability is a big challenge. I don't think we should discourage innovative thinking. I don't think we should discourage discourse. Actually, we should actually encourage it. And that's what Solutions Lab is first and foremost, one of the big goals of the Solutions Lab.
And I think, Mr. Tremblay, you may have, started your testimony with this, but I think it merits to go on record again. So I will ask again. Has the federal government requested for a study from the CMHC on a home equity tax?
No, it has not.
And you did confirm earlier in your testimony that the Government of Canada does not seek any policy advice from the CMHC. Is that correct?
It will not seek tax advice from CMHC. It will seek advice on housing programs and so forth.
Okay. Do I have time for one more?
You got time for one more, and then I'm going to go. Jenny has a quick question. Is Ed Fast or Ted Falk, you quick question you want to raise as well? Think about it in the meantime. I'll go to Jenny after Annie, and then we're going to cut out.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
It'll actually be Mr. Kelly who will ask another question.
Okay. We'll go to following Annie. We'll go to Jenny, and then Mr. Kelly will wrap it up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is to Mr. Kershaw. In response to the fall economic statement, your organization commented on the strong language to support childcare. In Budget 2021, we've proposed a $30 billion investment over 5 years and $8.3 billion ongoing to support affordable childcare and early learning in Canada. Can you share some of your thoughts on this investment and discuss the impact it could have on childcare affordability in Canada? And also, if you could offer some comment on what it would do to the labor force participation and economic growth more broadly.
It truly is an historic investment. We've never seen this scale of investment in childcare from a national government. So it has a bit of a long time in the waiting. Decades ago, the recommendation was made. And so kudos to this particular government and to our first female finance minister, in addition to the feminist cabinet, for pulling that off. It is a massive win, which will ease the squeeze on the generation raising young kids. It will be easier for them to deal with higher housing costs now that we were putting in a real plan to ensure that childcare never again costs another rent or mortgage size payment. It will take us a while to get there, but the dollars that are on the table are real. And when matched with a modest contribution from provinces outside of Quebec, where Quebec is already a key leader, we're going to see something really exciting. It will absolutely improve labor force participation for women generally, parents as well, more generally, and it will be a big part of our building back better and stimulating the right kind of economic growth.
Okay, we have to go to Ms. Kwan and wrap up Mr. Kelly. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you. The National Housing Strategy aims to create between 150,000 to 160,000 units of new affordable housing over 10 years, much of which some would argue would not really target those experiencing homelessness or core need. With that being said, to have a fighting chance at ending homelessness and addressing housing need, the CAEH have said Canada will need to build at least 300,000 new deep subsidy, permanently affordable and supportive housing units to ensure those units are specifically prioritized to those experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So in light of this analysis from housing advocates, I wonder if I can ask CMHC and Ms. Farah for comments on how are we going to ensure that the government will meet their promise and commitment to adequate housing as being a basic human right when we're so far behind with what is being put on the offer with the National Housing Strategy.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Tremblay, you said, and then Ms. Farah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the government, through the National Housing Strategy, that was the first big stride in terms of our commitment, our UN commitment to a progressive realization of a right to housing. And then I think the National Housing Strategy Act, which enacted some participatory mechanisms, such as the National Housing Council and the Federal Housing Advocate, are key steps to a progressive realization. As well, I think the government and the National Housing Strategy has been clear that we can't do this alone. The federal government cannot do this alone. We are looking, as I mentioned, for others to participate in this, to help us through this, whether it be through the private sector, the provinces, the municipalities. I think it's a collective effort that will get us there. And I think the government's through 6 successive budget has put money into housing, and so they are progressively realizing a right to housing.
Ms. Farah, fairly tight answer if you could, so we get one more question in.
I would just say that I'm deeply concerned, and I don't think Canada's yet on the path to dealing with the deeply affordable housing needs and social housing needs. The Rental Housing Finance Initiative is like 40% of the National Housing Strategy budget, and it's just not good enough. The affordable units are really not deeply affordable for the people who are most in need. And then they only have to be affordable for 10 years. They should be in perpetuity. So I think there's some advances that CMHC can make and changes to those programs that would benefit the country.
Mr. Kelly, last question.
Thanks. And I think I want to just go right back to where I was with Dr. Kershaw talking about the just getting into interest rate policy, monetary policy, and what that has meant during a pandemic where during a time of economic contraction, the price of real estate across the country, what's the national average, up 30% year over year, something like that. It just defies explanation, other than I would say primarily the monetary policy that creates incentive for every type and every level of home buyer to bid up prices. Could you comment on how we see asset prices rising even as economic activity shrinks and incomes for working people remain stagnant?
And Dr. Kershaw, if you could hold that answer to a minute. We've got a 3-hour briefing on the Budget Implementation Act that starts in about a minute. Go ahead.
So one can't do justice to that in 60 seconds, but the long and the short of it and solutions-wise is we need to be encouraging more lending outside of real estate. We need to be encouraging lending in real estate to be honing in on co-op and affordable purpose-built rental housing. And we need to go and invite Statistics Canada rethink how it's measuring the inflation of housing as it's calculating CPI. Those three things are critical to address some of the worries that you're raising, and they're right to be worried about them.
Okay, with that, thank you very much for holding that answer tight, and thank you to all the witnesses. We had a really a good wide-ranging discussion, even a little bit of politics thrown in. So it was, I think, a very good discussion with a lot of information that we can glean out of that panel. So with that, thank you all the witnesses once again, and we'll see Finance Committee members at the briefing in less than a minute. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.